Welcome to Pop and Play, the podcast all about play in its many silly, serious, and powerful forms. I'm Nathan Holbert.
I'm Haney Yoon, and in this season, we're talking about young people's media, how to make it, why it matters, what participation looks like, and its challenges and limitations.
And today, we're talking with Erica Halverson about what it's like to make media with children. Erica is a learning scientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and also the host of the fantastic podcast, Arts Educators Save the World, where she invites well-known artists to interview the arts educators in their life, which is pretty cool. I'm excited to hear how she's thinking about this and how she works around the kind of unique power and affordances of arts education. But I want to start by playing Erica for a moment here and asking you a question about the educators in your life, Haney. Who inspired you to sort of become who you are today, the great Haney Yoon?
The great Haney Yoon. Here's the secret to my success. Okay, so I have to admit that when you first asked me this question, I had a hard time answering it because I think my immediate response to you was, I don't know, I can't really think of any teachers that inspired me.
Because you are the only inspiration for you.
Yeah. I refuse to be taught.
I've been my own inspiration.
I'm unteachable.
And that may be true.
That could be true. Sorry. I think I was, okay, so then I had a moment where I was like, why is that?
Yeah.
And I realized, like, you know how people have like these special relationships with their teachers or special connections? Like you're like, oh my God, Mrs. Whatever she was like my friend and she like listened to me and all that stuff. Like, I don't think I ever really had that. Only because I was like, again, I've said this on the podcast, trying to be less Asian, like trying to be invisible, you know, and I think that invisibility also made me go unnoticed. So, you know, like some kids can provoke like a certain kind of relationship with their teachers because they're always like there, or they have like they have a certain like, I don't know what it is, you know, sometimes whiteness, but also just like a way of being that makes them more susceptible to those relationships with adults, right?
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily have that until, I actually do remember I got to 6th grade.
Okay.
And I had this, she was not my homeroom teacher, she was my English teacher. Yeah, I think she was my English teacher or writing teacher or whatever that was. And her name was Mrs. Feingold. Or Ms. Feingold, actually. Sorry. Ms. Because I have actually a story attached to this story.
Okay. So story within the story.
Yes, it was Ms. Feingold. And I felt like she was the first teacher that I felt like I had a playful relationship with.
Yeah.
Like she would go out of her way to talk to me, to make jokes with me. She would even like write me these little notes like out of nowhere. And like we had this ongoing joke for a whole year. And I can't even remember what the joke was. But it was the first time that I ever had that kind of relationship with any teacher.
You pass notes to your teacher?
Well, no, she would write notes to me. Like, now I remember the joke. The joke was that I was like older than my previous grade that I'm in. So because I'm at 6th grade, I must be in 7th grade. So she's like, so she would always like just make a joke about it. It doesn't make any sense. Okay.
But it felt personal. And
and she was just like, like I felt like it wasn't about giving me extra rewards. It wasn't about candy. It wasn't about like learning something different from her. Because I felt like I'd probably learned a lot from a lot of my teachers. Right? But it was like this special relationship and connection that I made to an adult in my life and a teacher that felt different from the kinds of relationships that I had with teachers before, which was very authoritative and, you know, you kind of do what you need to do sort of thing. So, and she also then eventually married our industrial arts teacher named Mr. Venegoni.
Ooh.
So she might be Mrs. Venegoni now. Yes. How about you?
That's good. That was a good story, by the way. And you acted like you never had a teacher that inspired you, but 6th grade, that's pretty early for an inspirational experience, I think. I can't think of anybody before high school.
I was an early childhood teacher, and I think, your favorite teacher should have been like kindergarten.
No. No, the teachers that were, I think, most inspirational to the eventual career trajectories I went on were in high school. And I had two teachers, Mr. Diskin and also Mr. Burkamp. One was the chemistry teacher, one was the physics teacher. And I think specifically what really drew me in, Mr. Diskin and his wife was Miss Diskin was also a chemistry teacher. And they used to do these big performances.
So it was a husband and wife duo?
They were, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what's happening now.
Getting Feingold.
but back then, and they used to do these big performances. They would do like these chemistry performances where they would blow things up, but they would do acting and they would integrate music. And so they kind of had this thing that was a mix of, remember Stomp, where they'd bang on? It was like a mix of Stomp.
Describe Stomp, though, for
so
the listeners.
it's like a percussion performance where people would be banging on like buckets or various kind of street artifacts to create really cool percussion songs, right?
Yeah.
So they would do these things with that. They would work with the kind of band, but also then they would integrate pyrotechnics with the chemistry stuff.
Oh,
And they would time that
cool.
to the beats as well. And so it was like this really cool, kind of like flashy performance that was also chemistry. And I just thought it was the coolest thing. And so there was a class I could take where I would assist the chemistry teachers in making the stuff for the labs that would happen in the class. So I would go back to the back room and I would get into the stock room and I'd like mix up the different, acids and bases or whatever it was. And I felt like a real serious person that was doing real stuff that was part of what was happening in the classroom.
Yeah.
Similarly, Mr. Burkamp, the physics teacher, he would be there after school sometimes. And so he would kind of come and help me out, or I would go ask him questions about class. And so we just started having this more kind of casual conversations. And I think it was this treating you, sort of what you were saying, treating you as a serious person, treating you as someone that isn't just a kid and I'm an authority figure over you, but somebody to have a real meaningful interaction and conversation with. And and that really stuck with me. And eventually when I became a teacher, I remember calling up Mr. Burkamp and saying, "Hey, can you give me some advice on like what it is to be a teacher?" And he talked to me for like an hour or two on the phone. And
Wait, so
gave me
you
all
talked
sorts
to
of good
him
advice.
post high school?
Yeah, after I
Wow.
graduated undergrad and became a teacher, he gave me some great advice.
See, that's when you know you had a meaningful impact on someone's life.
Right,
It's when you call them years after where you don't have to speak to them if you don't want to.
All my former students, my phone number is... Yeah. You know what? It seems like we're kind of circling an idea here around the importance of relationships, the importance of taking youth seriously, engaging with their ideas, engaging with them as people that have ideas. I think we should talk to Erica about the way she sort of integrates this into her work as an arts educator.
Sounds like a good time.
Great. All right, we are thrilled to have with us today Erica Halverson to talk about media and making media specifically with young people. So let me give a big, juicy introduction to you. Erica is professor of curriculum and instruction at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Go Badgers.
She's also the author of How the Arts Can Save Education and co-founder of Playmakers Laboratory in Chicago and the creator of Whoopin' Soccer in Madison, Wisconsin. Both brilliant educational communities that connect young artists and young writers with arts professionals to make and perform original productions. I'm excited to talk to her about that today. And most importantly, Erica is the creator and host of the smash hit podcast, Arts Educators Save the World, where artists and actors you know and love interview the arts educators that have inspired them. Erica, we're super excited to have you here with us today.
I'm excited to be here in studio. It's such a great kismet that I was in the New York area and y'all were ready to receive me. It's so cool.
We're always ready, first of all. Well, today we're going to talk with you a little bit about the work that you do, your research. We'll talk with you about the opportunities that you've engaged in to make media with youth. But before we get into that stuff, we got to start with a bit of a game.
I love a game.
You ready for a little game? Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's the idea. You are a learning scientist.
I am.
As am I. And both of us are pretty knowledgeable about nerdy things like cognition and nerdy things like design. But it's totally different than me. You are a performer and also a very knowledgeable person about musical theater and the arts. And so I thought it might be fun to invite you to provide some brief descriptions of core learning sciences ideas, but doing it in the style of well-known musicals.
Oh boy, now I'm on Jimmy Fallon.
Oh my God, is that where you got this game from?
No, is it on Jimmy Fallon?
Yes.
Okay, we'll try to start easy, I think. Maybe not. I don't think I could do it, but it's still all right. Why don't you tell us a little bit about scaffolding in the style of Oklahoma?
Okay. Well, darling, you see, it goes a little something like this. When you got a problem and there's no one to solve it, sometimes you got to give yourself a hand. I got to give myself a hand? How does that work? Well, we use something called scaffolding, which is, like you put on the outside of a building. A building? You mean like where, like on the No, like they have in the big city. Oh, the big city. Yeah, when you want to build a building in the big city, you need some help. How do you get that help? You build some structures that you can hang on to in order to be able to make that building stand up all on its own without help. Oh, I can't wait to go to the big city and see how that works.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
And by Oklahoma, you meant bad Southern accents, right?
Yeah,
that's what you
pretty
got.
much exactly it.
Excellent.
You want to try another one?
Sure. How's this going for people listening? Great? Are you enjoying yourself?
I'm having a ball. Okay, how about explaining design-based research in the style of Phantom of the Opera?
Oh, okay. Here I am in this place, trying to make something new.
Oh, God.
But if I do, I need to work with you to take some theories and people and practice our goals together.
Whoa!
Until we try again and again and again until we get it right.
Wow!
I decided to just go for the bad opera.
Oh,
singing.
man.
You
I
nailed
love that
it.
so much.
I can't hit that note.
Did I say
any of those notes?
Design-based research?
Yes, you did.
Unclear.
You did.
Again and again and again.
You got the iteration in there. You got working
Yes.
with others. You got theory building. I mean, you crushed it. Absolutely
Wow.
crushed it. That was incredible.
That was very good.
I have more, but I feel like we've asked so much from you already.
Yeah.
We should stop.
I know. Yeah.
I am sweating a little right now, just
Oh
so
my
you know.
God, that was
Like a little
so
bit
good.
of
That
That was
sweating.
good.
I mean, I have little faith. I will definitely take my words back because that was very good.
That was extremely good. You're in luck, though. I have one for you.
Oh, no, I don't.
I'm just kidding.
Do you want me to leave? Is that what you're trying to do?
Get out.
Yeah.
Erica, thank you very much for partaking in this little game. That was a lot to ask, and you far exceeded
definitely.
our expectations, which
Definitely.
were already very high.
I think that leads us really well to our first question because I'm thinking about what you just did right now, stroke of brilliance. And I'm wondering what child Erica was watching or doing with her time to grow up into this amazing adult Erica who can perform musicals on the whim. Like, what were you watching or engaging with when you were young?
So most of my childhood was spent in a dance studio, but not in a ballet formal dance studio like you may think of, actually with an organization that is now very, very close geographically to here at Teachers College, the National Dance Institute, which is a nonprofit dance education organization that was started by former New York City principal dancer Jacques d'Amboise to bring dance education to public school kids. And then NDI had some programs for kids who were really excited by dance and performing as a way to spend their time on Saturdays and in the summers. And so I spent a lot of my time doing that and learning how to be an artist from Jacques and the teaching artists who worked with him, many of whom were professional dancers, former professional dancers, but who wanted to be more expansive about the way they thought about art making and learning. So,
And you got introduced to through school?
Through school. Yep.
Okay.
I was 8 years old, and they had an artist in residence program at my elementary school, and any third and fourth grade kid could join. And so I joined that program, and that evolved into like a 7 or 8 year commitment to making art through dance.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm wondering because I'm thinking about all the things that kids get introduced to at school. And I'm wondering about what's the thing that sticks, right? Like you get introduced to whatever, like this art or this little thing. Like I still remember this guy came and played spoons at my school. And I was like, that was the most amazing thing.
I want to be a spoons
artist. If there was a spoon school, I would have gone to it. Okay, so I'm just like, what is it about NDI that really resonated with you that made you want to stick with it for all that time? Because as you said, it was a big commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So two things, I think. First of all, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the sort of twin counterpart to that, which on my own podcast, I had the opportunity to talk with Lin-Manuel Miranda and Robert Lopez, and our elementary school music teacher, who was my teacher at the same time. She was not involved with NDI at all, but at the same time that I was becoming part of this NDI community, I also was part of this extremely rich music and theater program in my elementary school. So I think I was surrounded by art making as legitimate and exciting forms of becoming human. It was, a pre No Child Left Behind time where, of course, there were academic commitments that we all were making and had to keep, but there was just not the pressure to use all of our time to do that and be that. So what kept me going back to NDI, two things. One, the community. I mean, this was a multi-everything community of kids from all over the 5 boroughs of New York City and New Jersey who came every Saturday. We used to rehearse at the New York City Ballet in their rehearsal rooms.
Oh, wow.
Hey.
So you would go to Lincoln Center with your little backpack and walk down the stairs and, and I had friends from all over the place.
Yes.
And we are still connected to each other, many of us through social media and some people through professional networks. And so part of it was the community and part of it was Jacques' vision for being in a constant environment of movement and inquiry and making and practice. I tell the story sometimes about how in the early years, I spent a lot of time under the piano, which is where you would go if you couldn't stop talking during rehearsal.
Oh, like literally under the
Get
piano.
under there.
The piano.
I thought that was a metaphorical thing.
Nope, under the piano. You know what it is under the piano? Loud.
Just get drowned out.
Piano.
Oh my God. Wait, was it a form of torture?
I mean, it was a form of, I told you to shut your mouth and you didn't shut your mouth. So I did spend a lot of time under the piano. But it also, it taught me at a very early age that the value of making art was not to be the star. And we all got our turns. I mean, they were very cool about, this group of, at the time, there were maybe 50 or 60 of us. I don't know.
Yeah.
Opportunities to stand out and shine, but that was never the goal. And so there were all sorts of mechanisms in place set up to explicitly teach us, like, it's not your turn.
Yeah.
Settle down.
Get under the piano.
Ones of us needed different
Yeah.
kinds
Yeah.
of ways to learn to
Yeah.
step out of ourselves, like settle down with ourselves
Yeah.
a little bit. So, yeah, I when they kicked us out at 15, that was a very long last set of performances of weeping, and, you know,
Oh, I'm
not wanting
sure.
to go, and
You spent so much time
yeah.
together.
so much time together.
Yeah, doing things that require a lot of vulnerability, I think.
And a lot
Yeah.
of commitment,
Yeah.
and a lot of time. I mean, and that's not to say I didn't consume other kinds of media as
Yeah.
a kid, but of course, as at least Nathan and I are pre-internet, kids of the pre-era.
Haney's 22, so
yeah,
she's...
so I don't know.
There wasn't like,
Yeah.
of
You were-
course, I watched TV,
Yeah.
love cartoons,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but it just wasn't. It didn't occupy
Yeah.
such a central place.
Yeah. Did you watch dance or get involved in it?
Did I watch?
Get involved in watching it, I guess.
Or even like Broadway, or
Yeah,
I mean,
I grew up here,
right?
I was lucky enough to grow up in New York City.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to grow up in a, multi-generational middle-class New York City family.
Yeah.
So going to the Nutcracker, going
Yeah.
to Broadway shows was part of what you got for
Yeah.
Hanukkah gifts or,
Yeah.
birthday gifts.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've just been lucky
Yeah.
enough to
Yeah.
grow up in a place and in a sort of
Yeah.
Yeah.
cultural way where we just always did
Yeah.
that. And then when I was in high school, so I found musical theater kind of in high school, and I went to a theater camp. And so I was an annoying theater camp kid who sang a bajillion musicals all the time.
I am
And
shocked.
I know. It's hard to
Judging
imagine.
by the performance you gave at the beginning,
It's worked out fine.
So then I kind of went on
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
move more into the kind of theater and
Yeah.
musical theater space.
Wow.
Hearing you talk just made me think about how I feel like in first grade, I had a big crush on this kid, Kevin McCormick.
Kevin, if
And
you're listening.
Partly is because his mom was a ballerina, I believe. And we went to go see the Nutcracker as a classroom to her performance of it.
Wow.
And it was just so magical. Like every time she came to class, like out of Nutcracker mode, I was like, oh my God, she's amazing. She's glowing.
On a very, very, very micro level, this happens to us with Woburn Soccer in Madison.
Oh, nice.
Great values of working in a smaller community
Yeah.
is kind of everybody knows everybody, and many of our performers get like quote unquote street recognition.
Yeah.
Well, they'll be walking down the street and like 2 8-year-olds will be like, Woburn Soccer.
I saw you.
And that is
That is really cool.
and it's memorable.
Yes, it is.
for
Yeah.
the artists, but also for the audience and
Yeah.
the folks
Yeah.
who then come to see that as a community of people who tell
Yeah.
stories together.
It leaves an impression.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Can you say a little bit about Whoopin' Soccer? For those of you that aren't as familiar, like what is it? How do kids get involved? How are the artists involved? Just
Yeah. So Woburn Soccer, I will say, is part of a larger ecology of programs and organizations. We were talking off mic about Story Pirates, another,
Love
group
Story Pirates.
that does this kind of work.
Cool.
We started a program. It's now called Playmakers Lab. Works in Chicago Public Schools, teaching writing and improv and performance. And a few years into doing that work, I got really fascinated by the fact that kids were learning stuff.
Oh?
And I didn't know anything. First of all, I didn't know anything about learning, but I also didn't even know that you could learn about learning.
Yeah.
I knew you could learn about teaching.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was lucky enough to find the Learning Sciences program at
Yeah.
Northwestern, which is the same program that Nathan went to. And there I was able to develop the kinds of theoretical lenses and methodological tools and ways of thinking and knowing that allowed me to better understand and articulate like what was happening for kids as they were engaging with these different kinds of activities and lessons and and opportunities, and how that looked like learning and what that meant, and how that maybe looked different than what we thought learning traditionally looks like, and also how that could enhance and push back on different ways that we define learning. And so Whoop and Soccer is an artist in residence program that goes into elementary schools, 3rd and 4th grade primarily, and does a during the school day in classroom artist in residence creative expression program where we bring professional teaching artists to work alongside classroom teachers with kids to create stories using a range of formats. And then we have a performing ensemble that takes some of the writing and crafts a kind of hour-long sketch comedy show that we then perform for the kids, for the community. We are lucky enough in Madison to have a youth arts center, and we perform there, and it has professional theater spaces and opportunities for kids to see their work performed in a professional space, which is really special.
I mean, that's such a powerful thing, right? It's like one thing to write. You know, you always say that we should write for a purpose, right? But you always feel like the purpose is school.
Right.
But then
for kids,
to write for a real purpose to a real audience and really have your words kind of like come off the page.
And valued enough to like bring them off the page.
That is very powerful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm curious, like, you've been doing this for a lot of years, and so I'm sure the list is long. But like, what are some of the things that these young people like to build stories about?
Poop is a common topic.
Poop has come up so many times on this podcast.
It's come up a few times.
In my opinion, if you can't get down with a poop joke,
Sure.
you should not be working with children.
Agreed.
We structure the storytelling around big idea themes that kind of help shape. So we have more specific genres like personal story, which, is both very live and connected for kids. Tell a story about something that happened to you. Also connected to things that are expected of kids in schools around that age. Like you should be able to structure a narrative of personal experience. We tell stories from pictures, which is something I learned from the great Carol Lee.
Yeah.
Around how images, particularly images that have cultural connections for kids, can spark authentic and meaningful storytelling beyond what is in the image and outside of the typical ways that schools ask kids to share things about themselves. So we do stories from pictures, we do playwriting. So we introduce the tools of kind of dialogue and stage directions and how does that change the way you tell a story if you are mostly using conversation and action rather than narrative description.
And these are for like 3rd and 4th graders? That's amazing. I mean, because I have young kids, and I think about the kind of work they bring home, and I think they're doing some interesting things. They're certainly like practicing writing, but I think this idea about dialogue and action and things, it is such a particular way of storytelling that's hard to do. And thinking about a 3rd grader, it's really cool.
It's hard to do if you don't take advantage of what that kind of storytelling affords.
Yeah.
So we often, I would say, you might say we work backwards, where we will start with a classic improv where we ask the kids to give the teaching artists characters, settings, and a problem. And then those 2 teaching artists will improvise a dialogue.
Got it.
And then we'll invite the kids to perform that dialogue so that they can get a sense of what embodied work is like, so that then if they start with embodiment, it helps them translate it back in the other direction to like, well, what should the lines be? Well, what should the actions be? If you're taking the actions with your body, it is actually much easier to then
figure out how to put that on paper. I was actually going to ask you to sing about embodiment in the style of Jesus Christ Superstar, but we'll do it next time.
She's already going to do it anyway.
This bottle is mine. No, sorry. kind of over the
great.
edge.
That's super cool.
How do you decide what makes it to the production phase, or is it basically all the stories make it to the production phase? Is it a mashup?
No.
Yeah.
We each residency produces hundreds of stories.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because,
Okay.
we work, one of the commitments that we made early on in Madison was when we do a residency at a school, we work with an entire grade.
Yeah.
And first of all, Madison practices full inclusion. And so there are no pull-out classrooms, which
Yeah.
I am very passionate about. And we didn't want Whoop and Soccer to become a special thing that like only certain kids
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
And so we work with a whole grade, which is typically 70 to 90 kids at a time. And so we got hundreds of stories to choose from. Our teaching artists give feedback. Every kid has a journal, and our teaching artists give feedback. 2 teaching artists give feedback on every kid's journal. So every kid knows their stories have been read, their stories have been, received. They get some, oh, I really love this particular thing, or I remember when we acted this out, some way to remind the kids that they have a legitimate audience for their work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the teaching artists select maybe 40 or 50 pieces that they're like, this could be good. And that's a combination of things that make them laugh, things that, are meaningful. And also they know the kids. And there are kids who really benefit
Yeah.
from having their work
Yeah, for
recognized.
sure. Uh-huh.
And those are not necessarily the kids who typically have their work recognized.
Yeah.
And the teaching artists come to know
Yeah.
those students. And so they'll say, like, we should really do this piece. Or, something from this notebook would be great. Or this day was a huge breakthrough. So
Yeah.
can we... And so then they'll give those pieces to a director. And then the director will sort of further narrow
Develop
it
with
down.
them. Yeah.
And then the performing ensemble takes 18 hours to put a show together, from like, here's the stories to it's the Whoop and Soccer show.
Yeah.
And so that all happens pretty quickly, and with a lot of openness to yes and
Yeah.
to, thinking through different ways to tell stories pretty quickly, and with a lot of collaborative practice and a lot of cardboard props.
Such a versatile material.
Oh, yes, for sure.
That's amazing. And I'm assuming the show itself is 47 hours long.
That's
right. Because there's so many.
50 minutes is my
Ooh,
like
nice and tight.
that is my golden
Yeah.
number that I am always like, do not make this show longer than 50 minutes. Sometimes it will go to
Yeah.
54, 55.
Wow,
but
so
we're
you
like
could
at-
get 40 stories in?
No,
and 50
no.
Oh,
We
okay.
get about 20.
Okay.
About 20.
Still, that's
wow,
moving.
that's still pretty
Yeah.
good. Holy
It-
cow.
The aesthetic, it was born out of a Chicago-based group called the Neo-Futurists.
Uh-huh.
And they did a play that I think in some iterations still exists. I think it is no longer called Too Much Light Makes the Baby Go Blind.
Oh, yeah,
It's
yeah,
now
yeah.
called The Infinite Wrench, where they perform, their shtick was 30 plays in 60 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So that aesthetic, the Chicago kind of experimental theater
Yeah.
scene in
Yeah.
the 90s
Yeah.
and early 2000s, very much we were shaped by that aesthetic, and there was some crossover of artists, but also just being a young person
Yeah.
in an art scene,
Yeah.
means that there's a lot of
Yeah.
porousness between, I don't know, approaches and aesthetics and ways of doing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I wonder, so to change directions just a tiny bit, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the podcast. So you've been doing this podcast, Arts Educators Save the World, for how many years now? 2, 3 years?
Yeah, this is kind of our third year.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't want to call it seasons because now you are recording
We're-
and producing content every week.
We're trying to be always on.
Whew.
There's so many stories to tell, and it is inspiring me to keep pushing forward. And I think the more we worry that we live in a world where the arts are going to be further separated and constrained from our everyday lives, the more I feel the need to keep telling these stories and keep making those ways of knowing and doing and being available to more people.
Yeah. So is that what inspired and motivated you to actually sit down and start recording these conversations?
So I wrote this book, How the Arts Can Save Education, which when I wrote it, I my fantasy of it was that it was like a popular press type book, like a book for everybody. And then, as you both probably know, with academic writing, even as accessible as you try to make it, it is not a book that tens of thousands of people will read. Even though you're like, but they should, and they will like it.
I mean, I feel like you should do an audible of that book, because I would probably listen to that. Just an audio version read by Erica. I feel like you would write such a good audiobook.
Absolutely.
Alec, who is my producer and co-host, and I, who've been friends for a million years, we're talking about how do we spread the word? How do we, you know, get the gospel of arts education going? And he had produced podcasts in the past and does to this day. And so we started talking about, like, what would that be like? What kind of, you know, format would we want? And actually, the idea sort of came out of our childhood experiences with Barbara Ames and Lynn, Manuel Miranda and Bobby Lopez, of like, oh, we should talk to the people who inspired us, who inspire others. And then luckily that is quite generative, because as you said, right, there's so many people have an origin story in their lives, especially people who pursue a particular passion. There is almost always like, this is where that passion was sparked, or this is where that passion was nurtured, or, you know, here is how I saw myself becoming. And so we've been really, I was going to say lucky. Some of it is luck. Some of it is due diligence to identify artists from across the spectrum of art forms, the spectrum of identities, spectrum of, you know, locations. We've been in the U.S. exclusively, but all around the country, where interesting relationships between being an art maker and having grown up in a space with somebody else have bubbled up and flourished. And so we've been really trying to tell as many of those stories as we can.
It's a really wonderful podcast. The density of tears on your podcast is slightly higher than ours. But I also am, as like a middle-aged man, I'm often like weeping as I'm listening to it on a run or something. Oh, it's so beautiful. They love each other.
Well, I mean, I do want to go back to something that you said earlier about the idea that you got into a doctoral program because you were like, oh my gosh, there's a theory about learning.
Yeah.
And that it all comes back to this idea that you were really thinking about what can we do to engage kids in classrooms, right? And I think that's a through line of your work, is that you started these projects because you wanted to get to a space where you could take that learning and think about how to engage children in that, or how to engage kids in that. And I think that's a really important thread, that this is, how do you reach an audience that really needs to hear this, that will actually impact and influence their daily lives, and really make arts a practice that they're going to use to think about learning and engaging and innovating and imagining and creating something very different and very new. And I feel like that's kind of how we started to think about this too. That we're like, there's got to be another audience. The audience that we started with, which was teachers and kids, right? How do we get back to reaching that audience, and what's the mode that's going to get us there? Right?
And I think something I've noticed with my colleagues who are increasingly nervous about the position of public education in general, they're turning to us because we've always had to do this work. We've always had to not prove our worth. That's not the right way to say it. But we've always had to work by stealth and work to make these experiences valuable and available and visible.
Yeah.
I feel like, oh, science people, welcome to the resistance.
Yeah.
Social studies people, come
on over.
Yeah.
That I think artists and arts educators have had a long history of being that inspirational seed while not being publicly valued for what that has done for humanity.
Yeah.
And so I think we're all really well positioned to be like, let's tell those stories.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And I think, just to add one more pile to rock to that pile here is the centrality of relationships. It's sort of, I don't want to say it's built in, but I think it's more commonly accepted as a part of the arts is relationships between people, and it's very often not at all seen as a core part of other STEMmy type domains, and what as a learning scientist is that no, relationship is a part of cognition. It's a part of learning, and it's not somehow separate depending upon whether you're in science or whether you're in the arts, right?
Well, all of the classes I teach, I have the opportunity to teach arts integration for future teachers, so people who want to use arts in their classrooms. I have a program for teaching artists, and then I also work with graduate students pretty regularly from education, but also different disciplines. Everything I do starts with scaffolding risk-taking in the classroom.
Yeah.
And not only doing the scaffolding, but meta-narrating that and explaining why you can't learn anything if you're not willing to take a risk.
Yeah.
And that, for me, is an arts practice.
Yeah.
Scaffolding risk-taking is an arts practice that should be translated to every teaching and learning environment, and begins with something as simple in the college classroom as knowing the names of the other people in your classroom. These are human interactions that require people to be vulnerable, and no one is going to be vulnerable if they don't feel seen.
Yep.
And feeling seen starts very basically with knowing what the person wants to be called.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with that. It's kind of like we focus so much attention on the products of what learning is versus like the conditions of what makes all that happen, right? And there are definitely conditions that you have to intentionally create to promote risk, for people to feel safe, right? For people to be vulnerable and open.
I feel like that's a beautiful spot to end here in this conversation. Thank you, Erica, so much for kind of taking us through your history and the various kind of places and people and domains in which you've sort of developed and practiced and then also created for many and many other people throughout the world. So we really appreciate that.
And for your excellent under the piano voice.
And for the singing. Oh my God, we got singing on this episode. It's amazing.
You got what my family refers to as bad opera voice. You're welcome.
And one last question for you. What's popping for you? What kind of media are you into? Movies, plays, books, shows,
Great
games?
Question. So one thing that's happening for me is that I'm on sabbatical. And
Woo!
My
jealous.
sabbatical project is I'm writing a novel. My vibe I'm going for is like Richard Russo meets like Curtis Sittenfeld. So sort of like Americana sort of meets like pop lit, chick lit stuff. So I'm spending a lot of time, and I'll just say very quickly, the book is about a small college in Wisconsin that's failing. And so the administration taps a young media studies professor to make a reality show with the faculty.
We have talked about this so many times.
And as you can imagine, it's a giant hit. And so I'm reading a lot about the history of reality television.
My God, there is a new book out.
Emily Nussbaum.
That's what I'm reading right
Yes.
now. I'm reading Emily Nussbaum's book right now. I'm also a huge reality television fan.
Me too.
So I'm a huge Real Housewives
What
fan.
have we been wasting this episode on?
Huge Real Housewives fan.
Yes.
And huge fan of the podcast Watch What Crappens, which is a recap podcast. And sometimes, I'm going to be honest, I watch the episode so I can listen to the recap.
podcast. Oh
Because
my
I
God.
prefer the recap.
That's so great. I love that.
That's outstanding. Erica, thank you so much for being here. Everybody check out her podcast, Arts Educators Save the World. It's a delight.
Yeah.
Thanks for spending time with us today. Really had a blast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
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 Pop and Play is produced by Haney Yoon, Nathan Holbert, Lalitha Vasudevan, Billy Collins, and Joe Rena Ferry at Teachers College, Columbia University with the Digital Features Institute. This episode was edited by Billy Collins and Adrian Vitullo.
For a transcript and to learn more, visit tc.edu/popandplay. Our music is selections from Leaf Eaters by Poddington Bear, used here under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial License. Blake Danzig and Meyer Clark provided our social media and outreach support. Follow at Pop and Play Pod on Instagram. Thank you to Abu Abdelbaghi for support with our website and additional materials.
Do you teach about play and pop culture? Check out our topics collection organized for the classroom. And of course, don't forget to share Pop and Play with a friend or colleague.
And thanks for listening.